Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Dr. Michael, good to see you.
Dr. Barry, always
even
good.
Through the medium of Zoom, it's still good to see you. And that's saying a lot since I kind of despise Zoom now, but it's still good to be doing Zoom sessions with you.
I'm happy to see you
because Zoom makes this all possible. But anyway, it's good to see you tonight. And it's good let's talk a little bit about this episode. It's a little bit of a special episode. We're returning to discuss No One's Version, Rob Horning's concernful analysis of the Suno AI sound technology. And we talked about that. If you're a listener to Critical Media Studies, you know that that was the subject of our last episode. We're going to return to it this episode, though, simply because after we finished our conversation about the Horning piece, we kept on talking about it.
Yeah, this is sort of the bonus reel from that discussion, and I'm kind of curious. I think it's probably best to just be upfront, right? This is not a meeting or a discussion that's had a whole lot of pre-planning or
No.
This is literally we finished the talk, we got out, and then we kept talking about it, and we made some music with Suno.
Well, we kept on talking. I guess maybe we can set up a little bit about. I think the steps behind this episode were this. We kept on talking about the essay, but then our conversation went to Suno, and we started thinking, can Suno possibly be interesting? Can it really be as bad as Horning, dangerous, whatever, as Horning suspects? So we started playing around with the technology, and that's this episode.
You just did it. Because you used, I think that those were the two lines that just got me going, right? One, can it be interesting? And Barry, I'm going to be honest, I just want to jump in with that. And I think
do that.
And I think in addressing that question, we'll get to the boogeyman, right? Like, is it as bad or dangerous as Horning wants? Interesting is an interesting, that was
word.
Terrible. Interesting is a very curious word to use because I think there's so many different ways we can parse that out.
Please.
I had a few conversations about this over the past week or so. One person I spoke with was saying, well, AI music is always going to be, and she's a musician, and she was saying basically it's always going to be, if not trash, subpar. And it's because it's a formula. It can't do anything interesting. And she had a really fascinating take on what happens with AI jazz and how just flat and boring it is. I had another friend I was talking with about it who is a musician as well. And he was sort of taken aback because he said, look, it's passable. It's the kind of stuff that you hear everywhere. The only thing it's missing is a body. And, music has sort of become disembodied in many ways. And so he found it very alarming. And then there was my take, and I'm going to pass it off to you here. There was my take on it that, hell yes, this is phenomenally interesting because it's fun and it's stupid and it's juvenile. And maybe that says more about me than it does about the tool. But, I found some really creative, some really appropriate, like things that worked, uses with this. I'll throw this out and we can come back or totally ignore it. But there's a lot of people who were using this to combine metal and anime. And for whatever reason, and it could be because I don't really get anime a whole lot, it worked and it worked well. And I found myself willfully watching it. So I think it's interesting. I don't know that it's an intellectual sort of interest. And I think that that's probably at the root of Horning's concern. And And I think that there's certainly a place for that. But yeah, I found it very interesting for ways that are maybe a little uncomfortable. What do you think about it? Like,
Well, I think wow, I don't know. Those are a lot of thoughts, and I didn't know some of the musicians' objections. I didn't know the objections of your music friends until we just spoke right
just
now,
now, yeah.
and they're giving me pause. But let me give a couple unrelated comment. Well, not unrelated to this topic, but in no particular order. I have these one or two thoughts about this topic. I guess I'm saying it's related, but there's not necessarily a through line. Maybe we're going to find a through line. But I do, it's not tangential to what you said. So the first thing I would say is we played with Suno. We should mention this. We tried to use the technology, uh, and we got, to use your word, interesting results. That's number one.
I let
Number
me also
two,
just say one thing. It was
sure.
frighteningly simple and very, very quick.
Yes, yes, it
So
was.
so I
Yes, it
just
was.
like it wasn't a complicated thing.
It wasn't a complicated thing. No,
My kids could have gotten it to do the exact
right.
same thing in very short order.
Nonetheless, Barry needed to look at a guide, and that's going to be relevant, and find a Reddit guide to how to use the technology. And that's part of that's part of my comments here. So let me go back. The first thing I did after sort of acquainting myself a little bit with Suno is I reread the Horning piece. And I noticed this time that Horning is really focusing a lot on something that actually Suno really can't do very well, which is do what we were talking about in that first episode, do an AI copy of, say, major artists. You can't do a mashup, I thought, from his description, that you can do expert, just say, I want this to sound like Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones, and it would do it. And it's not that way. It's not that you have to go through certain steps to get at the mashup, or to make, you have to do the right prompts to make the AI work. So I learned that it was so. Let me just make that obvious point to make my hopefully a little bit less obvious point. In order to make sense of Suno and build my own Suno, I looked at the helpful Reddit thread of Mr. Viceroy Fizzlebottom,
I love Reddit.
and I learned from Mr. Fizzlebottom's breakdown of how to use AI and his expert use of prompts. And then I was sort of taken into, then it became, to use your word, really interesting to me. And in fact, it became like a puzzle.
Okay, I see that.
And coincidentally, it became interesting. Like, how do I fit this piece together? I.e., more practically, literally, what this meant was I realized I would have to come up with certain prompts
Hmm.
that would create the text I wanted. And then I found out from Mr. Fizzlebottom that if I wanted to change around things, if I wanted to add more formats, more form, more stops, more starts, it was possible to do that through prompts. And so Fizzlebottom has this long exchange with the AI where he's saying, I really want a different chorus and I want you to change the lyrics. And so there was a fascinating description, a little bit beyond my ken, of how you could, as a musician, sort of get AI to overcome some of its bumps and become more inventive. So that was my mind Sunday night. And then Monday morning, um, I came across this quote from Stephen Sondheim. And this is the final part of my argument, Michael, because I came across this quote, synchronicity, right?
Right.
Chance favors the prepared mind, or all that stuff.
Right.
But this is the quote I came across. Uh, After I was in the rule making and rule breaking mode, after I was thinking of how to solve the puzzle of AI music. So I guess I went past the philosophy of Suno, which is what we were talking about last time,
Right.
to thinking about like what is AI? What are the component parts? What does it mean to work with AI and make music? And then I came across this quote from Stephen Sondheim. Quote, all art, symphonies, architecture, novels, dash, it's all puzzles. The fitting together of words have, by their very nature, a puzzle aspect. It's always about the creation of form out of chaos. So, in that sense, if you one talks about if one substitutes lyric writing in Sondheim's case for prompts, and you talk about the creation of form out of chaos, although interestingly, the chaos of AI is not, it's just infinitude. It's not a true chaos, but I guess
Hmm.
that's the chaotic aspect of it. But at any rate, I felt that the I felt that the AI musicianship as represented by Mr. Viceroy Fitzbottom actually kind of fits a definition of art. So that's my first comment. And then my final comment is this, getting it back directly to what you said. Now, uh, so I guess I'm going even further. Now I'm trying to marry my comment or match your comment, match my comment with your comment. Two things. One, uh, maybe maybe I'm saying that AI music is more than interesting. That in its puzzle aspect, in the fact that you have to enter into a kind of call and response with the technology,
Right.
that it actually meets a definition of art.
So,
Comment one, or rather, conclusion one. And here's conclusion two. Uh, and maybe this gets us back to Horning again in another mode, but it's interesting to me, especially the first comment you made from a musician, where she feels maybe we can translate her comment or put together her comment and my comment, and we would come up with something like this. It's a puzzle, but it's not a really. And you are sort of hinting at this. It's not a really intellectually rigorous puzzle. It's not a
uh,
satisfying puzzle. Maybe that's what it is. And then I don't know what to do. And I'd like to hear your comments about the absence of the human element. Although in this description, there is a human
there is a
element.
human. So there's a lot to try and wade through here. And I want to sort of, again, piece together a few anecdotal discussions that I've had on the fringes of this because it all seems to be coalescing into, I think, a singular argument.
Okay.
I was talking last night with a friend, and not an academic, and we were talking about ChatGPT and AI in the classroom. And he was asking me how I deal with it. And he said, I don't really see the problem. These kids are going to graduate and they're going to go to work, and their work is going to be dominated by AI and ChatGPT. It's kind of stupid to resist it. And I said, I see where that point comes from. My problem is that what I'm trying to do is to help students articulate ambiguous or hazy concepts and then work through the process of refining them. And AI presents too big a crutch to an arbitrary finish line, and it removes the messy struggle that is where learning happens. And so, said differently, any tool is only as good as its user. And if you have a
Wow.
critically thinking user, then these AIs become potentially very powerful. If you have a user who is not adept at thinking, at engaging independently of the tool, that tool becomes a crutch, which is very limiting. Now, if you take that, put that on the side, you said some really interesting things. I want to start by saying I made a song called Barry's Tomatoes.
Indeed.
And I did this, I think, when we spoke last time. I had made some offhanded comment about you growing tomatoes. And I'm looking at this dashboard for Suno, and I said, okay, the juvenile in me came roaring to the surface, said, shiny toy, let me play. And my first impulse was, what is the dumbest thing I can come up with? And the idea was, let me give it something absolutely non-musical. Let me give it something absolutely not interesting. Let me give it something that, even by the standards of the worst kind of popular music, is too dumb to record. And let me see what it can do. So I said, give me a song that I could listen to while grading papers about my friend Barry growing tomatoes. This is not a slight against you or tomatoes or grading papers. I just thought, wow, this would be a really dumb song. And it kicked out something that made me giggle hysterically. And I think you got a good
It gave
laugh
me
out
a
of
lot
it.
of pleasure
And
as well.
I will post, I've got it queued up on YouTube. I will post the link to it, and you guys can decide for yourselves. But the point is, I made trash music. And that was because that was the goal. You, in talking about Fizzlebottom, made the interesting connection for me here that no, I was the blunt object trying to use a fancy tool. I'm not going to ever get something better than Barry's Tomatoes, which is great, but it's great in a very sophomoric way. To make art requires engagement, refinement, critical thought in a way, and this might offend everybody. This is sort of like a chisel and stone. You've got your chisel, you need the chisel. The medium can be stone, it can be whatever it needs to be.
I think so, Michael.
I think with the right amount of engagement and direction, these things become tools. And the product, and I guess what I'm getting at here is, in order to make something that someone might consider art, the product needs to be wholly intentional. If you rely on some sort of algorithmic output after give me a song about tomatoes, I don't think we can call that art. Now, again, I'm not an art critic. I'm not an art historian. I'm not an artist. So I'm sure that there are ways around this. And I'm sure there's an argument for Duchamp's toilet and saying, well, here we go. You can consider this everyday thing, this standard thing, because reality is, Barry, your tomatoes sound like they could be on the radio. I mean,
Right. Right.
it's harmonic, it's formulaic in the way that it could create an earworm. I found myself humming it,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
did too. I did
but
too.
I think that really, if you're going to look at art as a puzzle, there has to be an intentional manipulation of the pieces. And I
Right.
think that if you're going to follow Mr. Fizzlebottom's directions and engage these tools deliberately, maybe what we've got here is access to sort of sonic ornamentation that you might not have if you don't play all these instruments, but you have a vision for it. So yeah, I think you could do art.
Yeah, I think that, I'm inclined to agree with your first comment, the first musician comment you quoted. I have a lot of sympathies with that statement, and also the second comment that you mentioned. But yeah, my experience reading the Fizzlebottom thing kind of changed my mind. And then, like I said, I came across the Sondheim and I said, well, that's one aspect of art. Maybe Sondheim's definition isn't all encompassing. I don't think he meant it to be all encompassing. Actually, though, he did. He did feel that there was a cognitive, intentional element to art, and I think I agree with that, and I think you agree with that,
Mm-hmm.
judging by what you said. So by that point, by that rationale, that would be something that Horning didn't really capture in his criticism.
The other thing that I think is cool, I always come back to the William Gibson Rocket Radio piece from Rolling Stone about the street finding its uses for new technology. The thing that struck me about this that's really kind of cool is, again, you go look through, YouTube, and there's a lot of people who are taking Suno. I think it's Suno. If it's not Suno, it's something akin to Suno.
Sure.
And they're pairing it with animation. And now you've got this multimodal composition, which is doing kind of cool things. And I think that, you look at this tool, which, some simple mind like myself is going to pick up and say, I'm going to play with this and make songs about tomatoes. There is the opportunity to merge mediums and to do fun stuff. And, at the end of the day, also, I think we can have these heavy discussions about intentionality and art and where we want to put that threshold and what happens when you introduce, non-human decision making into it. There's also, an argument for fun, which then I think can create spontaneity in a weird way.
Which is really what Sondheim is saying when he talks about puzzles. He's
Yeah.
talking about the ludic element
Yeah. And
in art
so
making,
in
right?
that regard, the fact that you're playing with an algorithm that is bigger than you are,
Right, right,
but you still get to choose, if you read Fizzlebottom's work, how to
right,
manipulate it.
right.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to both sides. I think it is certainly interesting, though. If we're going to ask that question, I think it's certainly very interesting because it lets you play in new ways. And I think that, to me, that's the core element of this. It encourages play in a way that's democratic, and I think that is scary. And we've talked about this in various other forms, right? Like the idea that you're going to break down the walls and the tastemakers don't get absolute say. I mean, this was Odell, when we were talking
Mhm.
about the taste to come. This is terrifying if you are trying to maintain a standard, because you can't. I mean, I did it, so any idiot can do it. Um, and you can get something fun. And
Right.
that's fun. Then I think that's kind of the scary thing here, is that in a lot of ways, I think fun feels antithetical to art. And yeah,
Is that your final comment? I'll give a final comment, and then maybe that's going to be the end for this Patreon special.
yeah. The special edition
The,
that nobody
the
had to pay
special
for.
non-Patreon
Yeah.
edition of Critical Media Studies. Well, I think we're kind of ending in the same place, really. I'm going to add a little note of dissonance, but I don't know how much I sympathize with the dissonance.
Okay.
So I'm going to end on a critical note that comes from elsewhere, and I'm going to be the spokesperson for that critical note, but I'm not sure I totally agree with it. But while you were talking about Tool, I mean, think of the words that you used a lot in your discussion in the last couple minutes. You were using words like tools and equipment. And initially, when you were talking about Fizzlebottom, you were talking a lot about equipment. So I naturally flash back on an old friend of our show, Martin Heidegger. And I am reading for, I don't know, just for giggles.
As
I'm
one does.
reading, because
As
why
one
not?
does.
It's summer, time to go to the beach, and I don't think there's better beach reading
Than
than
Martin
Martin
Heidegger.
Heidegger's The
No,
Origin of the Work of Art.
there's not.
And something that comes up in the origin of work of art is something I will put to you, Michael, maybe as a closing remark, but if you might have a comment on the remark. So, in the origin of the work of art, it's written it's written with a lot of the major ideas in being and time. Still, he's still working through a lot of those ideas, especially that notion of truth as being simultaneously a concealment, and a revealing, right? He uses that binary, that polarity to talk about art. So in Being in Time and Elsewhere, he talks about truth as a revealing. And because it's a revelation, it happens in a clearing. We talked about this, I think, in our Heidegger episode.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime there's a revelation in the clearing or disclosure in the clearing, it doesn't clear up everything. There's always a new mystery that goes along with the new revealing or
Right.
disclosure. So he translates that into the work of art. And he says, and this is how, and I think this kind of circles back to or connects back to our topic. So, in order to distinguish, in order to characterize or define the work of art, he says the work of art makes, he makes it a truth event, much like he described in Being in Time. So, the work of art, any artwork, is a revelation, and also there's something held back. Um, New metaphor in the origin of work of art. He talks about the aspect of the work of art that conveys an idea, that conveys a truth about the world or being. He calls that the world created by the artwork,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a poem or a painting or whatever
Right.
it is. There is a disclosure of being, truth, whatever. The world is the term he uses. But he says necessarily, and this is how you know it's art as opposed to something else. For every work of art, there's going to be a disclosure, a revelation, an epiphany, as it were. But there's always going to be something you can't explain. He calls it earth in the metaphor, but that's less important than what earth signifies. And what earth signifies is this, it's the part of the dual characterization of the artwork that he gives. So every artwork discloses something, but necessarily keeps something concealed. There's something mysterious or shadowy or ambiguous is a word you could use. I don't know if he used it in the essay so far, but it's kind of what he's gesturing toward. So now let me get this to AI, and maybe I'll close not with a remark, but maybe with a question that we can ponder. Um, is AI, so we seem to agree that AI has a cognitive, intentional aspect that looks a lot like puzzle making, and that puzzle making looks a lot like art. But does Suno pass the Heidegger test? Is it all revelation? Is there no ambiguity? Is the problem? So Heidegger's implicit idea is that if it's really art, there's something about it that you can't explain. Even, I mean, you can criticize it, you can comment on it, you can even come up with reasons you find it powerful, but you're not going to exhaust it because you gave it an interpretation or a criticism or praised it. Might that be a problem with AI? That it's all disclosure and there's no ambiguity or mystery?
I think that if you want to look at the fact that these are all, again, algorithmically driven and they're looking for matches, they're looking for patterns, right? Because it has to make sense in some
Right.
capacities. The difference between something that you're going to get generated by a Suno or a ChatGPT versus something that comes from an artist, say, right, is that it's very, very unlikely that you will get the intentional surprise. We actually had this part, this question was part of our discussion. You're not going to get the intentional surprise. You might get a creative phrasing. You might get an interesting metaphor. You might get something. But I think it's important to consider that you have to look at the work of art in totality, right? You can't look at a painting and say, wow, I really like this small portion of it. the rest of it's trash, but this is art. Well, that's a part of the whole. I don't think you can separate that. The artist gets to determine the boundaries, right? This is my poem. This is my painting. This is my song. This is my sculpture, whatever the case may be. This is it.
Right.
It's defined by its boundaries in a way.
Right.
And so if you think about, the ability to reveal and conceal, the ability to sort of make sense and surprise, I mean, all of the different sort of, facets of Heidegger's argument about what constitutes art, you can say that it's possible, but it has to be done. And I think that's and I don't anticipate that it will be, and that it on its own, the thing that we're talking about, the thing that is going to make something interesting beyond its novelty, right? Barry's Tomatoes is interesting because it's novel, it's funny. I had a stupid idea and it produced an artifact that matches that stupid idea. In order for that to be interesting on an artistic level, I think it has to challenge you. And there's an intentionality to that I don't see any of these programs doing independently. Now, I can, as an art, I mean, I'm taking great liberties here. As an artist, I can go in and prompt it to give me 20, 30, 50, 500 changes until I get something that's interesting to me that I deem worthy of this being what it is.
Yeah.
But no, I don't. I think that because the problem is that ultimately with art, you're looking at something that doesn't immediately make sense, and the algorithms are seeking to make sense. And so, sure, could you get a weird sort of, programming hallucination that does that job? Yeah, but it's going to be one small moment in an otherwise fairly banal piece of whatever that sounds like my music.
And one thing I noted from Fizzlebottom, interestingly enough, the hallucinations are what drove him crazy.
Mm-hmm.
He had to work around them. They were rarely, and he mentions this, I think, at one point, that sometimes there will be an amazing improvisation.
Yes.
But a lot of times the hallucinations will just be bad.
Right. But
trash,
but
unintended,
to the point,
unusable. Right.
Yeah. And to the point, that one amazing hallucination in and of itself does not make art.
Does not make art.
So nice. I think my parting take on this, as a tool, it could be instrumental in creating art, but I don't think that it does that or really is capable of doing that.
And it's certainly not replacing it.
No.
It's but not
but what it will do, and this is back to Horning, what it will do is it will certainly have an active role in that massive middle of fluff. He is right in the fact that this is going to be a presence, and it's not an artistic, it's not
right.
A dense, enriching presence. This is the wonder bread of music. But it's,
right.
But he's right.
There's going to be a ubiquitous aspect to this that's going to be more clutter, more noise in a way.
Yes, I think so. So that's it. Yes, that's my take.
That's a good place to end.
All right. Barry, this was fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will post the 2 songs. I'll post links to the songs so that all of you who have been waiting to hear about Barry's Tomatoes can do so. And the lyrics are in the description of the YouTube videos for them. So it's all there. I would love, comment away. I'd love to know what y'all think of this. I didn't write it, but I guess I prompted it, so my name's on it.
Well, yeah, your name's on it.
And your name's in it, so.
We're not going to get into copyright trouble. That's all I know.
Oh, nobody wants to own this one now. All right, Barry, thank you. This was fun.
All right, take care.
All right, bye.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.